Welcome to Fruity Knitting. This is episode 71. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Andrea. And last episode, I started a new craft. I started to learn how to crochet on an extremely ambitious crochet project. Well, in this episode, you're going to find out how all of that came about. Because last year, when on our trip driving over to Snowdonia for our Christmas break, we visited Jane Crow's design studio in North London. So Jane Crow is an amazingly talented UK crochet designer. She's written several books and her work is regularly featured in the Rowan Knitting and Crochet magazine. So she's really top of her field, but she's also a really funny person. So I really loved interviewing her. And I do think that even if you don't crochet, you'll find this interview very interesting and very inspiring. In fact, I think you better watch out because by the end of the interview, you might all end up like me, wanting to start these incredibly ambitious crochet projects.
Right. You've been warned.
Yes. We're also featuring a really good knitter from Columbia in the U.S. That's Constance Caddell, and she knits beautiful projects, so you'll have fun meeting her as well.
Yep. We're also showcasing a brilliant Queen Bee design by Catherine Clark in new releases. Andrea's got a tutorial for us, and we are starting another Cal, which is exciting. And we've got lots of projects, some projects finished, some projects being started, and some projects which are just continuing. So all of that's coming up. We hope you enjoy the show. So we're starting with me in under construction, and I've made a little bit more progress in Andrea's hiking jacket, the jacket that she's designing herself. As you can see, I've finished the back piece here, and the two front pieces are complete, and you can also see that it's all been stitched together very beautifully. I have to admit that I didn't do that. Andrea was not quite up to teaching me how to do the back stitch and then supervising me, make sure I did a good job of it.
I was too tired.
Yeah, so she did it herself, which sometimes is the easier option. But Andrea, you have assured me that I will be initiated into the art of backstitch for the sleeves, which is still coming up.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's the status of it now.
I've just kind of used the knitting needle as a brooch pin because it's curling in on itself, so you get to kind of see a little bit of what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I can see that starting a trend, Charles. Right now I'm working on the collar here, which is a 2x2 rib to match the band down the bottom. So that's really cool. It's going to come up and double over, right? And it'll be sewn down on the inside, so it'll be nice and snugly warm. And the other thing that I've got left on this body part is down the two front sides here. I'm going to do an I-cord bind off as a nice edge before we put the zipper in. So that's where I am.
Yes. Now, last episode I had this brainwave. I thought it was a brainwave of putting in a contrasting zipper, contrasting coloured zipper, and then knitting the inside of the collar in the same contrasting colour. Well, I went off to the store to see what possibilities there were in zipper colours.
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah, and I haven't been completely happy. You know that I can't get away from green. So I found this lime green zipper, but I'm fearing that it could be just a little bit too much. I don't want to look like a kindergarten teacher, like I'm dressing up for play school.
Yeah, not that you've got anything against kindergarten teachers.
No. And it's all, I mean, this is a wanderjacke, so it's meant to be for hiking
jacket, yes.
Out in the wilderness so that the helicopters can find me if I get caught in a blizzard. But it's also not meant to look like the really full-on, bright, sparkly ski gear because it is wool. And this kind of could look like that. So I will be taking this one back, but it was sort of where I was heading. And then I thought, okay, what would be completely neutral? And I found this blue one, but it's gold, and that kind of looks just a little bit too tacky, maybe.
Is it a bit too much bling for you?
Yeah,
girls?
It's a bit blingy, the gold. If it was silver, it might be better, but the gold kind of, I don't know about the gold.
I'm going to say, I don't see the problem.
You don't see the problem. Anyway, you're not going to see all of it. It's going to sort of be sitting in like that, if you can imagine. So that would be the demure effect. And then I've got this wool here, because this, you can see it's green again, but unlike this one, it's a little bit softer. You can kind of imagine what that might look like on the inside, so that sort of when this peeks open, you get a flash of green, which could be cool. I don't know whether I should just have a blue zipper and keep that neutral, and then you just get a flash of green every now and again. Or if I can find this colour green, have the green down the front. So I am open to your comments. What I really like, this is my Kate Spade's glasses cover, and I just love these two colours together. What I love about them is that I wouldn't think to put them together. To me, they clash, but they're very exciting that you have to keep looking at it. And that's the kind of colour combination that I wanted here. So I didn't want to directly take the opposite colour on the colour wheel, which would be sort of like a mustardy colour, a browny yellow is on the colour wheel for that. I wanted to take it something that was more clashy somehow, but still looked good. So I don't know if I have to give up on that idea or not, but you can let me know if you've got any brilliant ideas.
Yeah. All right. So Andrea, I think you've got something to show us.
I have. So yes, it's finished. It's gorgeous. I love it. It fits perfectly. I'm thrilled with it.
Are you done?
Yes.
Okay.
For new viewers, this is Nightingale by Nora Gon. It comes from the Pom Pom magazine, edition 27. Nora Gon was the guest editor for this edition, and we interviewed her back in episode 69, and she talks about how she directed the other designers for this edition and also the inspiration behind her own design, which was this one. So here we go, it's all finished, and I'm going to just go over the design points one last time for completion.
Yep.
So the yarn that I used is the Hebridean 3-ply by Alice Dunmore, and the colourway is Pebble Beach. So it's just this really lovely warm grey colour, and if you look up close you can see hundreds of specks of all the colours of the rainbow in a muted way. Just there, so it kind of glistens like a wet pebble in the sun.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the idea. There's so many interesting things to this design, so I'll just go over some of them for you. But first of all, you can see this very unique cable design here. Whenever you see a really unique cable design, you can kind of just assume it's Nora Gon's, I think, if it's a really good one.
Right.
So to me, it reminds me of a shield or a coat of arms. So there's a couple of things that were particularly interesting, I think, about this design, and one of them is the ribbing. The ribbing, so the side panels here are just a straight 2x2 rib, but the centre, front and the back sections have a combination of different kinds of ribbing in them. So you've got 1x1 ribbing with the twisted knit stitches, and then you've got some panels of 3 knit stitches and panels of 4 knit stitches, and those wider stocking stitch panels travel up out of the waist and onto the body, and they then become part of the cable design. So that's really unique. Yep. And then the twisted stitches, they also travel up out of the waistband, and they travel up the body on either side of the cable design. The cable design itself, as I said, it just reminds me of a shield. Do you think so?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
Or a coat of arms.
Yeah, that sort of thing, yep.
Yeah. So the cables are on a reverse stocking stitch background, but there's also a couple of panels of seed stitch here and up here, or I call it moss stitch. I grew up knowing it as moss stitch. And what else can I say? Oh, and the sleeves are particularly fun to knit. So what goes on in the cuffs or in the ribbing of the sleeves mirrors what goes on in the body here. So you've got twisted stitches, 1x1 rib and twisted stitches travelling right up the arm. The arm gets bigger. It's quite loose and gathered on the shoulders, so it's kind of like a puffed sleeve. And at the end, you've also got this lovely little delicate picot edging on the neckline. Yeah.
Very good.
Do you like it?
Yes, of course I like it, though.
It's very dressy, really. Even, it's a dressy jumper.
Yeah, it's one of these dressy jumpers that you've made yourself and you wear every day.
Yeah.
I know how this is going to go.
I don't go out enough. We don't go out enough.
Yeah. We've done that before.
We've done this conversation.
Have we been out since we said we were going to go out? No. Okay.
We've had this conversation on international television before. So let's move on. There were 2 aspects about this design that I particularly enjoyed, and that one of them was the puffy sleeves. They're a heap of fun to wear, by the way, but it was really fun to see how they were shaped and then gathered to fit in a normal set-in sleeve. So that was very interesting for me. And then I also learned a new way to hem this picot edging. So I thought that you guys would also like to see those two things in more detail. So I've made a very small short film for you that's coming up right now. And straight after that, you're going to meet Constance. So this design is called Nightingale. It's by Nora Gon, and the pattern is in the Pom Pom magazine, edition number 27. And there's two very interesting techniques used in this garment that I really enjoyed doing. The first was creating this really lovely gathered sleeve cap in the set-in sleeve, and the other one was finishing the hem on this picot edge neckband. So first of all, I'm just going to show you how you do this gathering on the top of the sleeve cap. So the sleeve cap has been worked so that while the outside edge of the bell-shaped cap decreases, the inside stocking stitch panels increase so that the top of the cap ends up way too wide to fit into a normal set-in sleeve armhole. So on the very last row, you're going to gather up the stitches together and cast them off at the same time, and then you end up with this lovely little puffy sleeve cap. To gather the stitches together and cast them off at the same time is actually pretty easy, and I've been doing it already along here, so I'll show you what you do. We're going to slip the two stitches from the left hand needle knitwise off onto the right hand needle, and then knit the next stitch, and then I'm going to pass those two slip stitches together over the top of that stitch, and then pass the stitch beforehand over the top of that. So I'll do it again. So we slip the next two stitches knitwise onto the right hand needle, knit the next stitch, pass these two slip stitches over, and the first stitch over as well. And you just keep doing that right to the end of the row. So this is what it looks like finished. It's now the right size to fit into a normal set-in sleeve armhole, and it's all gathered up the top. The other fun bit was hemming the picot edge neckband with whip stitch. So this neckband is going to be a doubled neckband with a picot edging, and when you work a doubled over neckband, you work the neckband to be twice the size of the desired depth, and then fold the band over to the wrong side and sew it down. And because I've done these eyelets at the halfway point, that's what the pattern tells you to do, when I fold the neckband down, it has this picot edging. You can see it here. This section's already been folded and hemmed. You can finish the hemming in a few different ways. You could cast off the live stitches and then sew the cast off edge to the inside fabric using whip stitch. You can also keep your stitches live and knit the live stitch into the back loops of the inside fabric and cast off at the same time. I'll show you how to do this method just for a couple of stitches. So for this method, I slip my needle into the left hand stitch, just knitwise, and then I slip it down to a loop directly underneath that stitch, and I knit the two together, and I slip it off the needle, and then I do the next one. So I'm knitting into that stitch and into the loop in the fabric on the inside directly below that stitch, and I knit that together, slip it off. I've now got two on the right hand needle, and then I cast off the first stitch over the second stitch, and I just continue doing that all the way around. And a third way to do it is to whip stitch your live stitches directly onto the back loops of the inside fabric. That's what I've done here along there, and I've turned my garment now inside out. So that's the right side and that's the wrong side. That's what the pattern tells you to do, and I think in this case that's the best method to use because it creates the least amount of bulk on the inside, and this design does have a fairly delicate looking neckband. So first of all, fold the hem to the wrong side and pin it carefully in place, making sure that the stitches are aligned so the hem won't end up skewed. With your darning needle, go through the live stitch knitwise and pull the stitch off the needle. And then go through one of the strands of yarn on the inside fabric that's directly aligned underneath that live stitch. And when you're pulling on the yarn, you want to make sure that it's not too tight so that the neckband will stretch easily with the rest of the fabric. So there's the neckband all finished. There's some really great design elements in this project. So in addition to knitting yourself a beautiful sweater, you'll also learn some interesting techniques along the way.
Hello, my name is Constance. Currently I reside here in Columbia, South Carolina as I pursue my PhD in Library and Information Science. I began knitting in the year 2007. I found myself near the end of obtaining my bachelor's degree in history, and I still wanted something that would occupy my time that would still be rewarding. And so I flocked to knitting. I knew no one who knitted. I had no friends or family members who were knitters, and so I had to learn from books. My sister purchased a Learn to Knit kit from the local craft store for me, and within that kit there was a book. And from there I learned the basics of knitting, and from then on I would just continue to flock to books for materials on knitting and the details of knitting. Then YouTube started booming, and I started flocking to those YouTube channels that taught the details of knitting, channels like Very Pink Knits. And from then on, I fell down the rabbit hole, and I knew I wanted to eventually get to the level of knitting garments, because that was the thing that I found most beautiful. I entered the world of Ravelry, and I would always like and favorite those garments. And so I would add them to my queue, but it seemed like such a feat that was so far off into the future. And then one day I took the plunge, and I haven't looked back since. It's such a rewarding hobby because I've been knitting for over 10 years now. I can't even believe that. And I have yet to get bored with it. There's always something new, a technique that I haven't mastered, and I'm far from mastering this craft. And I love that. It is because of that that I will always want to knit, because there's so many more things that I want to do. And my journey has not ended by far. This is a book, Sweater Girls by Madeline Weston and Rita Taylor. And I saw this book and I was completely inspired by the vintage knitwear designs in the book, and there was this one garment in it, the Vivian sweater, and I immediately knew that that was my favorite garment from the entire book, even though it had quite a few gorgeous garments. And so I dreamed of creating the sweater, but I'd never created Fair Owl before. And so I took the plunge and I created the Vivian sweater. And first I made it with a cotton yarn, and then recently it took me, with that first version, it took me over 2 years to create it. And so I revisited the pattern, and this time I made adjustments. I decided to work it with a wool yarn. I used a tighter gauge also. And I also changed the technique in which I knitted the sweater. It was through this sweater that I used Alistair Moore's technique of using two hands to do Fair Owl knitting, and I learned it from her book. And so I'm very, very proud of this sweater, and I just really enjoyed the colors. I like the purples and the greens and the blues. And also they had a Fair Owl hat in the book. It was called the Kim hat. And so I decided I had some yarn left over. Why not go all out and make a matching hat? And so I am quite pleased with this garment. And it did take more time than I would usually take to create a garment that was made from either a DK to worsted weight yarn. But I'm still very pleased with it. And it didn't take me as long as the first time I created a Fair Owl garment. It went by much, much faster. And I'm really pleased with this knit. I am a huge Andy Satterlund fan. She's a knitwear designer. And she describes her knits as retro designs for the modern knitter. And I always felt as if that described me to a T, because I love the vintage aesthetic, but I don't always have time to create those fingering weight vintage garments. I would like to wear the garment sometime in this lifetime, and I'm not the fastest knitter. And so I always flock to her patterns because it has that vintage flair, yet they are usually made with DK to worsted weight yarns. And when I first started looking at her designs, it was the Agatha sweater that just captured me. I thought it was the most gorgeous design I'd ever seen, and I knew that I wanted to create it one day, even though it seemed like such a big task to take on. However, I did eventually create the garment, and it's one of my favorite sweaters and most worn sweaters to this day. I really like that it's a lace garment, yet it's so cozy. She used 3 different lace designs in the sweater, and I like that the lace panels were broken up with reverse stockinette stitch. And I chose to use another wool yarn, Cascade 220, and I went for this type of Kelly green color. I don't think that's the official name of the color, but I really wanted to make it in a color that was my favorite color that I would enjoy wearing, and that's probably why this is one of my most worn sweaters to this day, and it's definitely a big favorite of mine. This is another design by Andy Satterlin. It is the A to Z cardigan, and I really like that. Again, it had that vintage feel of a varsity sweater, and I like that I would have that creativity to choose colors, and I again went for this type of Kelly green with a navy blue trim. And I like this sweater pattern so much because it's a simple knit, yet it was a very gentle introduction into techniques that I'd never tried before. For example, the pockets were created using intarsia, and you can personalize the sweater, which I did the letter C for Constance, with duplicate stitch. That was also something new for me. And Andy uses set-in sleeves, which are created with short rows, and it gives it a nice cap sleeve effect. And her designs are usually seamless. This one was different in that it was worked from the bottom up instead of top down, as most of her designs are. And I still really like her designs because I am not the biggest fan of seaming, even though I will seam a garment when I have to, but I tend to be attracted to those garments that are seamless knits, and I really enjoy set-in sleeves. So as I've stated, there's always something new to try in the knitting world. And so I recently created my first garment using a super bulky weight yarn. And this is the Freedom Jumper by Wool and the Game. And I was pleasantly surprised by how much I love this garment. I found myself wanting a super cozy sweater that I could throw on those cold, windy, and rainy days, and also just for a quick walk with my dog. And I was about to purchase a sweater, and then I thought about it, and I said I could create my own. And I'm really pleased with this sweater. I did not enjoy the process so much, but I love the product of this garment. Because I never worked with super bulky yarn before, it was rather harsh on my hands, and so I had to do a number of hand exercises. However, it was still a very quick knit, and I finished it in 3 days, which I'm surprised by, but that's understandable considering the yarn is such a heavy weight. And it's really an easy garment, and it's such a rewarding project, and I'm really surprised by how much I love it.
Welcome back. Isn't Constance fantastic? She does very beautiful projects. I've been following her for about a year now on Instagram, And she didn't mention this during her segment, but she actually sews, and she's quite a keen and good sewer as well. And I'm pretty sure that the two dresses that you saw her in, so one when she was inside talking and the other one when she was outside knitting by the water, I'm pretty sure she made them herself, because she quite often shows that she makes these matching outfits, like very pretty skirts and dresses, and then very tailored little vintage cardigans and jumpers to go with them, and she always looks really brilliant in them.
Yep. I saw her most recent project was difficult intarsia and stranded colourwork designed by Alice Starmore from Tudor Roses. Yeah. So she's a very ambitious knitter and sewer, I think, and definitely worth following. She does also have a YouTube channel called Stitching Over the Days, so you can check that out.
Yeah, she looks like she's always constantly trying to improve her skills.
Yep.
So very interesting to follow.
Yep.
In the last episode, I showed you my new crochet project, Bohemian Blooms by Janie Crow, who you're going to meet very, very soon. Well, I finished one of the panels, and I know that Jane will be watching this episode. So Jane, I do hope that you're impressed with my work as a beginner. Here it is here. This is the first panel done. This is simple striped panel out of double crochet, that's the UK term, or single crochet, that's the American term. That's all that is. But last night I learned how to do surface crochet, and that is this dark pink, which is just a surface stitch. It's also very easy, but it's nice. It's interesting because I could see how you could really incorporate that surface crochet on your knitting to do just, maybe a border somewhere, or to go up a purl stitch and just get an extra bit of colour into your knitting. And that's actually what I wanted to learn crochet for, is to combine it with knitting. So there we go. There's one of the panels done. Ta-da!
Looks like beautiful work, dolls.
Thank you.
Just checking it out on Janie's behalf.
Yeah.
Looks beautiful.
Good. We'll leave it at that then, shall we? I've got 3 more of these to do.
Yep.
So here's my second panel. It's got all these itty bitty ends on it, but they will get covered up when you've got the border stripes on it. So last episode I showed you the method that I was using to weave in my ends as I go, because the 2 blue threads you just carry up the side and they will be woven in. You'll crochet over the top of them in the border, but the brown threads you have to actually cut off and weave in. So what I was doing is laying the edges or the ends on top of the crochet and doing my double crochet all the way over. Now some of you said that was okay, and some of you said it's going to come, or the ends are going to come wiggling out on the very first wash, and that wouldn't be secure enough. So I've been playing around again, and I've devised a bit of a new method. So I want to show it to you, and you can give me your feedback as to whether you think it's a goer or not. So here we go. I'm doing double crochet. I've started a new yarn, and that's my tail there, which I've been laying across the top of the work and double crocheting over the top to weave in the end, like that. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm moving it to the side more, like this, and then I do the first half of the double crochet, then I take the end and whip it around underneath the needle to the back and finish off that stitch, and then back to the front again and start a new stitch. Halfway through, get the tail underneath the needle down to the back and pull it through. So I probably wouldn't do it on every single stitch. I might do it on every second or third stitch. So I'll go back to doing it by just laying it over the top like that. And then I do it on this one here. So halfway I get the tail underneath the needle towards the back like that, and bring it forward again for the last stitch. Okay, so if you have a look at the final result, I don't think you can see it on either side. So it's been woven in and it's more secure, but you can't see it. So maybe that's a good method. Okay, so I hope you saw what I was doing clearly enough and to be able to give me an informed opinion about whether you think this latest method is a goer or not. Feel free to leave your comments down below, and I'll gradually get there and learn.
Yeah.
We thought that after this interview with Janie Crow, a lot of you are going to want to get out your crochet hooks yourself and start a project. So we thought we'll start a crochet cowl, a crochet along. And and there's not going to be any rules for this crochet along, except that your project has to start after the 1st of February and it'll go all year long.
Yeah, look, I have to jump in. No rules, that's not on. We're going to have rules, and the rules at least are it has to be crochet.
Yes.
Yeah, all right, so it's crochet. You're allowed to put in any project you like. It might be a toy, small thing, which may be a sophisticated toy or a simple toy, or you might want to go for one of Janie's stunning heirloom blankets if you're, after something big.
Not too many dishcloths.
Dishcloths.
Yeah, maybe we say no dishcloths. Can we
We'll work on the rules. We'll work on the rules.
Only one dishcloth.
All right, one dishcloth
Not
allowed
multiple.
per entrant.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's that. And what we're hoping for really is that we have a nice forum where if you're a newbie crocheter, you can come in and show your work and ask your questions or ask for advice. And all the veterans out there can share their wisdom and experience, and we all learn a little bit. And of course, everybody is welcome to join. So get in. To get you even more excited about entering this crochet along, Janie is offering Fruity Knitting patrons a discount on 3 of her heirloom blanket kits, which include both the pattern and the yarn that you need for the project. Janie's going to show us these blankets in the upcoming interview, and she talks about how they are constructed. So this is really a great opportunity to join in.
I'm about to start a new project, but I'm not sure which one it is yet. I've got nothing else on my knitting needle, so I'm swatching. And I'm swatching with this really beautiful yarn. It's it's a Pels Ull yarn, Tinder by the Hillersvåg woolen mill in Norway. And I'm going to choose one of Linda Marving's designs, but I'm not sure which one yet. In fact, I might even end up taking a couple of elements from 2 different designs and putting them together. The designs that I'm looking at, none of them use this yarn as the recommended yarn, so I might also have to recalculate to make sure that it ends up right.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't want anything to be simple, would you, Daz?
Well, no, it's not that. It's just I have to figure out, it's always a mixture between I want to do something that I'm going to learn something new in, a new element, and I've got to knit something that I need in my wardrobe. At the moment, I need more cardigans or jackets in my wardrobe.
Right.
So I've been having a look at a couple of her jackets as contenders, so you can let me know what you think. So there's this jacket that I particularly like, and that's called Corey. It has a shawl collar and it's got some chunky cables on the sleeves and the back. But the cuffs I would make less chunky because I want to be able to easily pull the cardigan on and off underneath a coat sleeve without getting caught. And I also think I'd make it a little bit less dressy. Another design that I'm really interested in is this lace jacket, which is called Sculptured Frost. And this pattern also has a shawl collar and it's got really interesting cuffs, which I think would be fun to knit. And it has this tuck, which goes up both fronts and then around behind the collar. And that's a really typical design feature of Linda's. And I'd like to try out how to do it. It looks a really neat thing to do. And this yarn does actually have a halo on it. And that halo would obscure the lace pattern just a little bit, but the advantage of that is that it would make it look a little bit more casual, I think, and less, you wouldn't see the stitch definition so clearly, so it wouldn't look so dressy. And because I want something that's slightly more casual, but I think it would still look good.
I think that could work well.
Yeah, so that's sort of at the moment heading towards top of the list. And then there's another jacket called Enna, which is here, and I really like that, but I don't think I could do it so long because it would hug my hips and my bottom too much. I don't think that would be too flattering, so I haven't quite figured out what I'd do there. I'd have to do the bottom at least 2 sizes bigger and then decrease at the waist for my upper body. It's tricky. I don't really need another jumper, but if I was to do one, I'd probably do this one, which is called Serona. It's a really classic cable jumper, and I would actually get a lot of wear out of it. So you see, I'm having a lot of difficulty.
Yeah, this is what you call agonising over a decision.
Well, as you know, I'm pretty much a monogamous knitter, and I just like to be 100% happy with what I've chosen before I start, and then I just plough through it and do it.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know how I would go if I had a few projects. I know a lot of people do this, but for me, if I had a lot of projects and I got to a difficult or less interesting part on one design, I think I'd I'd worry that I'd never come back and do it. You sort of get a momentum when you're a monogamous knitter, and you just plough through because you're excited about moving on to the next interesting bit or the next interesting project. Anyway, that's how I work. As our long-term viewers know, every episode we do ask for financial support, and that's because this is my full-time job, and it's actually more than a full-time job. I'm working overtime as well, and Andrew's helping me on top of that. And our goal is to have Andrew working full-time on the show with me so that we can make the workload actually sustainable and Fruity Knitting can continue into the future, which is what we would really like. So if you are watching Fruity Knitting and you're really enjoying it and you'd like to see it continue, then do please become a patron. And we also want to thank our wonderful patrons who've made the show available for everybody up to now by their continuous support and encouragement. We so appreciate you.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you very much also from me.
My name is Catherine Clark, also known as Brooklyn General Store and Love is in the Making. I'm here today to talk to you about my latest pattern release, Beyla. Beyla is named for the Norse goddess of bees. She is a tribute to bees and all of their hard work. My inspiration for making Beyla was obviously to honor bees, but also, more importantly, to honor what bees symbolize, and that is hard work, communication, collaboration, healing energy, and feminine power. As you can see, the queen is right here in the center of the sweater. She's the soul of the sweater, and just like in the hive, she's surrounded by her worker bees. So she has bees up top, which I think of as her shield, and she has bees below, which I think of as her support. In between the bees, there's hexagons and honeycomb and lots of little blue flowers interspersed all around, which I think of as pollen. The queen bee has these lines coming out of her, which I think of as power. And these lines are echoed in the back, down at the base of the sweater, coming out of the bottommost flower. So I think of this as a symbol of the interconnection between the bees and the flowers. So the flower power going up and the queen bee power going down. Also on the back, there's lots of worker bees and honeycomb and pollen all over the back. The construction of this sweater is top-down, 3-color, using the easy percentage system. Once you get to the underarm, there's no shaping at all. There are some short rows in the neck, and the color work begins right at the very beginning in the neck, in the short rows. I used La Bien-Aimée for this sweater in the sport weight, which is a beautiful yarn, bouncy, just enough tooth to hold the stitches during the color work. There are times in this sweater where you are using 3 colors at once, and times when you just have 2 colors. But there is not a whole lot of time where you don't have 2 colors going. not a lot of breaks, except for in the sleeve. My favorite part of this sweater is the vines on the side here. They come from the back and they go across the side right into the front. And my second favorite part is the detail on the sleeve. There's a little pollen echoing the neck, and then these rays that go down, these rays of power, again, that are really coming from the wearer. So it's like your power going out into the world. I want to thank you for listening, and I can't wait to see what all of you make and all your color combinations that you come up with.
That's such a cool design with the queen bee in the middle and all the vines coming around the side and the worker bees, all over the other spaces. Yeah. I love it. And I love seeing these patterns where you've got the real story behind it and some meaning to the design that's there.
Yeah, the symbolism.
Yeah.
I wonder if you knitted yourself a jumper like that it would be your go-to jumper on days when you're just in a slump, when you're feeling like, oh, I can't be stuffed. Because you've got the queen bee there, you've got all of these industrious and cooperative worker bees, and so you just kind of look down and you see that energy and you see this energy and you think, right, I'm going to go and get this stuff done.
Yeah, so Dal, are you the queen bee?
Yeah.
I think you're the queen bee. Am I the worker bee?
You're my worker bee.
Am I your one and only worker bee?
Yeah, you have to do everything. You have to be the guard, the drone, and...
No, we've got a drone.
Oh, we've got a drone.
Yeah.
So what else is there? There's a guard?
Jackie's the guard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're just my worker.
I'm the worker.
All right.
Oh, well. Catherine Clark is offering Fruity Knitting patrons a 25% discount off her Beyla pattern, and she's also offering patrons a discount on everything in her online store. Catherine has a ton of stuff in her online shop. You'll find an incredible choice of yarns, lots of beautiful fabric, tools and notions, books and patterns, and lots of other amazing things. Thank you very much to Catherine.
Coming up now is Jane Crowford's interview. Jane's studio, which you're about to see, is really bright and beautiful. The walls are covered with her gorgeous crochet blankets and she has brightly coloured yarn everywhere, so it was a great place to do the interview in. The particular favourite for me in the interview is when she talks about the history of crochet, because there's some really fun surprises there. And also there's an interesting correlation between maths and crochet, which she talks about.
Yeah, we've had a great time today, so thank you very much for being with us. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time as usual. And for today, it's goodbye.
Bye. Welcome to Fruity Knitting. Today we're going to venture into the world of crochet with one of the UK's best known crochet designers, Janie Crowford. We're here in Jane's studio in North London, and you can see surrounding us are some examples of the most amazing heirloom blankets that Jane is well known for. Jane is a regular contributor to the Rowan magazine, and she's also published several books. And interestingly, one of them was on finishing techniques for hand knitters. And another one that we definitely have to mention is the Ultimate Crochet Bible. So Jane, thank you so much for inviting us here.
Welcome.
And coming on Fruity Knitting, especially since you are still recovering from a pretty nasty cold.
Yeah, a little bit croaky, so we'll see how we get on.
So we'll start with Jane's background and training.
Okay.
You completed a Bachelor of Honours degree in Constructed Textile Design, which involved designing machine knitwear for the fashion industry.
Yes.
And then you went and worked for Rowan doing hand knitting. So tell us about your time working for Rowan and how you transitioned from hand knitting to crochet.
Okay, so I did a degree in constructed textiles rather than fashion knitwear. So it was based on, well, not based on, but what we did was a lot of technique stuff. a lot of understanding how woven fabrics worked, how knitted fabrics worked. We did printmaking, we did everything. So when I came out of college, what I did is I worked for 18 months as a swatch designer, and that was all machine knitting. We didn't do any hand knitting at that time. So when I was about 25, I was very lucky to get a job with Rowan as a design consultant. And what Rowan were doing at the time was building a team of consultants to work in department stores so that they had people on hand to offer a high level of technique, if you like, to people who were coming in with questions about their knitting. And it was knitting at the time, not crochet. It was mostly knitting. So I was one of a team of consultants. And I know you had Linda Marving on a few weeks ago, and she was a consultant as well. So there was a big team of us. And we needed to have the techniques to pass on to those knitters. So we were trained, by Rowan to have a lot of technical background. So things like finishing techniques, things like how you make cables, how you do colour work and all that sort of stuff. So Rowan were really good at giving us that grounding, but it really interested me as well. But I think because I'm quite technical anyway, I especially loved finishing techniques. And I know Linda talked about that as well. So
she was very influenced by you.
Yeah, she said that, which was really amazing to hear that. And then within my work for Rowan, I was introduced to Debbie Bliss, who at the time was designing with Rowan, and I worked for her for a couple of years as well. Yeah. And she was really great for me. She really encouraged me with my design work and with teaching work. So I worked in her store in Islington for a couple of years. And around about that time, I was offered the chance to write a book called Finishing Techniques for Hand Knitters, which was called All Stitched Up in the U.S. And that's kind of like, that was my first book and my first sort of foray into technical writing, if you like. And since then I've done quite a lot of books. But Rowan started to introduce crochet into their magazines, probably in the mid-2000s. And that's when we were all given a crash course in crochet.
How cool.
Yeah, because we had to be able to, to teach other people how to do it. So my great-grandmother was a massive fan of crochet. She made loads of granny squares. So growing up, I was surrounded by it, but it wasn't something that had kind of intrigued me, if you like, until then. So with Rowan's help, I kind of got up to date with my techniques, and since then that's it. I've been the crochet queen, if you like.
And then soon after that, they asked you to write you got the contract to write the Ultimate Crochet Bible, didn't you?
Yeah, so quite soon into my foray into crochet, I was still relatively a beginner, and I was offered the chance to write a book called The Ultimate Crochet Bible, which I did warn them at the time that, I was a beginner. But I think actually the book was really good for that, because it meant that I explained things as a novice and put extra steps into techniques that maybe didn't exist before that in a lot of books. So that was my kind of real grounding then.
And that also, you would have put all of your teaching experience into that too, because you had done a lot of research.
Yeah. And also, around about the time that I was writing these technique books, I don't mean it in any way demeaning, but I had small toddlers at the time, and so I was used to sort of breaking things down, saying, this is why you need to do this, and this is the steps you need to take in order to do it. So I think that probably helped me as well, along with doing lots of workshops too.
As well as your degree, actually, because it was all on constructed textile technique and stitches and how they all work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not just like you're a novice writing an amazing book.
Well,
you actually had, you had a lot of good background.
Yes.
And you'd already written a book, hadn't you?
Yeah, I'd already done a couple of books by the time I did Ultimate Crochet Bible, but that was my first crochet one, so...
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will get on to crochet very soon, but it was so interesting that she has written a book on finishing techniques for hand knitters. So can you just quickly give us a couple of your favourite tips?
Probably my favourite is match a stitch on side seams. I really I really struggle when things have been put together badly. And you know that when you look in through a magazine and you see a really nice garment, and automatically the thing you'll see is if it's been sewn together badly. It's the first thing you notice. So mattress stitch on side seams. And I'm a real neat buttonhole freak as well. So, you know, the sort where you cast off stitches on one row and cast back on the next row. It can be really difficult. You can end up sort of almost looking like you get two buttonholes.
Okay,
so So there's a little tip. What you can do is when you cast the stitches back on, before you put the final stitch back on the needle, if you bring your yarn forward at that point, before you slip the stitch on, it's like doing a wrap stitch, actually. Okay. And it really tightens up that final stitch.
That's cool.
So that's my little gem, that one.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sure that a lot of people will be grateful for that, because that is important, isn't it? Sloppy buttonholes aren't very nice.
Yes, sloppy buttonholes. Yeah.
Okay, so back onto crochet. Crochet is actually a fairly modern craft, which is interesting. So tell us about its history.
Okay, so unlike knitting, where there's examples of knitting, you know, from hundreds of years ago that they've found, they think, you know, people have knitted for a very long time. With crochet, there isn't that existence of old items. So it's like you say, it's a relatively new craft. They think it kind of originates from France, most likely. So the word croche or crochet, meaning hook. But there's a technique called tambour, which is a type of embroidery. And it was done on big frames with like a canvas that was stretched on a frame. And what people would do is push a hook through the fabric and draw a thread through.
Okay.
And it's like a, you know, crewel work, you know, like a chain stitch.
Yeah.
So it was used as sort of decorative embroidery. And then at some point they think probably some bright spark worked out that they actually didn't need the fabric in between the hook and the yarn. So you could actually work the stitches that you could embroider without the fabric behind them. So they think that's where it possibly came from. It really had its heyday, if you like, probably in the Victorian era here in the UK, in that at that time, if you wanted something lacy, like real intricate lace, it would be handmade with bobbins, little pins and bobbins, and it took hours, you know, to make. So there was a crochet equivalent, really fine lace work, which they used to refer to as poor man's lace because it was quicker, took less time. So the Irish were really good at that. I'm sure you've seen examples of beautiful Irish crochet. So what happened at the time was, you know, the Irish people making this amazing crochet were really poor. It was the time of the potato famine and all these things going on. So somebody had the idea of sending Queen Victoria a piece of crochet as a gift. And she really loved it, really liked it. And not only did she like the item that she was sent, but she liked the idea of learning to crochet as well. So she did learn. And if you look at old pictures of her, you'll see she's often sat with a little bit of crochet on her lap with a hook. Because it was seen at those times, it was a very feminine thing to do.
Yeah.
So like with my big hands, it's not the same, but you know, it was seen as a very, your hands looked nice. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So if you were sat in the parlour waiting for a gentleman to call, you'd make sure you had your crochet
to show
on
your
hand.
hands.
Yeah.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah.
A flirtation trick.
Yes. So it was a very feminine thing to do. And actually, there are examples of crochet that the Queen actually did herself, and she made these sashes as a reward for some of her soldiers, and you can still see some of those.
How incredible! Are they good?
Yeah. They're not what you'd expect. They're wool, and they're bright yellow, and they would be worn as a sash with a belt across, and they would pin their medal or whatever
for
to
her
it.
generals.
So, yeah, and she did about 8 of them.
Really?
Yeah.
And how did they receive them?
Yeah, I'm sure they were over the moon.
Thrilled. That is such a cool story.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So it is really, really modern, isn't it? If you think about it, that's only, 200 years ago at the most.
Yeah. I mean, in comparison to knitting equivalents, definitely, yeah.
Cool. Okay, well, the image of crochet hasn't always been very positive, has it? And particularly in the wider public, I think it's suffered more than knitting from having a granny image.
Yeah.
And knitters typically criticise the fabric as being less versatile than knitted fabric and being harder to grade into a range of garment sizes.
Yeah.
But interestingly, you started off in hand knitting and then moved to crochet. So you have to tell us, why do you prefer crochet than knitting? What are the advantages and disadvantages? What are we as knitters missing out on? and then just to finish off with, is there anything that we can do to help improve the image of crochet?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think as soon as, like if I'm in a situation where people ask me at a party or something, what do you do? And I say I'm a crochet designer, you can see straight away they're going, oh, ponchos and granny squares. So, it has a bad reputation, and I think there's a lot of designers out there, thankfully, who are really beginning to push the craft, and kind of not so many looking back at granny squares and traditional ponchos and things. So that's really good. For me, I think the reason I love it is I'm very much, I'm about colour and I'm about surface pattern. And when I used to do knitwear, the fashion in knitwear, although the shawls and things are lovely now, aren't they? This fashion for lovely hand-knit shawls. But most garments, actually, knitted garments, tend to be quite plain. Yeah. And I really, as somebody who's interested in surface pattern, crochet kind of provides me the way of doing that knitting possibly doesn't. So because I like to put a lot of design elements into my work, you kind of end up looking a bit like Joseph in his Technicolor Dreamcoat if you're not careful. People wandering about in these brightly coloured things. So I think for me, that's where the blankets and home things have come in. Yeah. And actually crocheters really like to make those things. They're much more influenced by colour and technique possibly than knitters are. The other thing is that crochet takes a lot of more yarn. So it's quite yarn hungry.
And you were saying also that out of the Eastern Bloc countries, a lot of really innovative work coming out, and they have really extensive technique there.
Yes, so they're still working. So Russia, for example, and also Scandinavian countries as well, actually. I mean, a lot of the Dutch are really sort of pushing the boundaries of crochet, and far more, although they work on much finer yarn with smaller hooks, they're adding lots of things in there, adding lots of beads and crocheting around knitting needles and all sorts of things, just to sort of push what they can do with the craft. So that's really exciting. Yeah.
And then there's also freeform crochet, and that seems to give you a lot of scope for artistic expression. So what can you tell us about that? Yeah,
so freeform crochet is exactly what it says on the tin, if you like. It's a way of freeing your mind and crocheting at the same time. So it's kind of like, one of the things about crochet, it's about constant counting and constant concentration, if you like, checking. So with freeform crochet, when I do freeform crochet workshops, I tend to say, right, there's no patterns, I'm not expecting you to make this, I'm not expecting you to do this. It's kind of pick up a yarn, start crocheting, don't count, and just create something. There's quite a few designers. It's almost seen like more of an art form. Tends to get quite 3D. Yeah. There is actually a mathematical relationship to freeform crochet as well, in that there's a thing called hyperbolic crochet.
Wow.
Which, I'm not a mathematician, so I don't quite understand it, but it's hyperbolic planes are to do with negative curves in space.
Wow.
And the way mathematicians are, they like to have a representation, don't they? They often have models or, drawings that represent their maths. And a crocheter found that if she crocheted continuously doubling her stitches, she created a piece of crochet that actually represented this hyperbolic plane.
How extraordinary.
Yeah, I know.
What's amazing is that they kind of got together and had a conversation about it. Like,
she was a mathematician and she crocheted.
Okay.
So that's how that came about.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Do you know her name?
No. But we can look it up.
We'll have to look it up. That's pretty cool. I'm sure there'll be some geeks out there.
Yeah, I'm sure
interested.
people know, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so when you're crocheting, what kind of qualities are you looking for in a yarn? Is it going to be different from what you'd want in a knitting yarn? And on top of that, have you noticed a difference between the yarn market for crocheters and for knitters?
Yeah, definitely. So when I'm looking at designing, because I'm tending to design blankets, that's the thing I most like to do. If I go out and choose a yarn that's £8 a ball and my blanket's going to use 30 balls, that's going to be a big price point. So I think I do tend to look at things that are more, machine washable, if in case the dog's laying on it or, the kids have thrown it over their bed or stuff like that. So from my point of view, when I'm sourcing yarn for a design, I am thinking about the price point. Also, because I said already, it's yarn hungry. Yeah. So crochet uses a lot of yarn.
It's quick too.
It's quicker, much quicker.
You just get through that yarn so fast.
Yeah, so crocheters would produce their projects far quicker than a knitter would. So when I look, I tend to go for DK weight yarns, and I tend to look for clear colour, so good colour palettes.
Good colour saturation.
Yeah.
So not sort of variegated too much.
Yeah. The thing about, all these beautiful hand-dyed yarns that are out there now, because of the way crochet works, a crochet stitch is often, it's almost like a tube, if you like. Yarn gets buried within the stitch, whereas with knitting you've got a V at the front if you're doing stocking stitch and little bobbles at the back. So you can see if you buy a hand dye and it's got a beautiful little fleck in it, when you knit it you'll see that lovely little fleck, but with crochet
it's hidden.
It could be hidden.
All your money's hidden.
That bit that you fell in love with when you crochet is hidden within your stitches. So I think crocheters, unless they're making shawls and things, they're far more likely to be sourcing
a cheaper yarn.
More affordable yarn. Yeah.
And probably also less fibre conscious. Is that right?
Yeah, probably. They're looking to be able to put things in a machine if they get dirty. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So for the last 7 years, you have released an annual crochet along project.
Yes.
And they've usually been your beautiful heirloom blankets. So Jane is going to show us some examples, and then you have to tell us how the whole crochet along works.
Okay.
And also talk about your design process.
Okay. So I did my first crochet along project in 2011. And at the time, there weren't really a huge amount of knit and crochet alongs going on. It was something that was still quite new. And one of my fellow design consultants at Rowan, Debbie Abrahams, who's a knit designer, she came up with this idea of doing mystery knit alongs with blankets. So she runs a club, still does it actually, called the Mystery Blanket Club. And because we're good friends, she was sort of saying to me, somebody is going to do a crochet equivalent of this, and I really think it should be you. Yeah. So she really encouraged me to kind of get out there and do a crochet along. And what I really wanted to do, because it was quite a new market then. There weren't loads of people crocheting. So what I've always done with my crochet alongs is build it as a kind of learning project, so that things get progressively harder, and that each month I would focus on a new technique. So be it beading or changing colour or doing some 3D work. So hopefully not only at the end of it did they get a blanket, but they also had the knowledge. I did that for 4 years and that was through Rowan that I did that. And then in 2015, what I felt was that people were paying a high price point for my clubs. So the yarn, because it was Rowan, came in at quite a high point. And I felt I wanted to sort of get the crochet techniques out to more people. Yeah. So I was really lucky. In 2015, I was approached by Stylecraft to do a similar thing to the Crochet Club, but to a wider audience. So what we did is we actually released the patterns for free. And we did it in the same way. We did fortnightly downloads, and then at the end of 3 months, I think, they would have a finished item. So I've got them here, actually. This is the first one I did with Starcraft. This is a design called Lily Pond, and possibly you can see from the colours that it was based on Monet's Lily Pond paintings. Yeah. And what I did is I designed it in a way that it got progressively harder. So the first piece that people would make is, I don't know whether you can see it, is this big panel here. Mm-hmm. And that has got very basic stitches. So it starts with double crochet, which is US single, goes on to treble crochet, which is US, I have to think, double crochet. And then we have a wave stitch. So that's a relatively straightforward piece. And what I always suggest in my patterns is that rather than make one piece and then go on to make the next matching piece, is you make them all at the same time. Okay. So you do your 2 rows of green in double knit, in double crochet, and then do your second piece and your third and your fourth. Okay. So that you're kind of, learning that technique as you go along.
So you start each of these 4 pieces and you do all of the light green first. Yeah. And then you do all of the dark green.
Yeah, that's how I would suggest you do it.
That's great, because then you know it's going to match, isn't it? Because they do have to match,
yeah,
don't they?
Absolutely. And that's one of the key things with crocheters as well, is they're far less... they think about tension less than knitters do.
Because they're not going to be wearing it as often as...
Yes, absolutely. It's not. It doesn't have to make a garment. Yeah. So if their piece comes up bigger than mine... they're not so worried about it. So doing all 4 at the same time kind of means that at least those 4 are going to match.
I have done this. I can't remember what it's called, but I have done it. I did it on a button band. Okay. So I could just do that. I get lots of practice, learn how to hold the crochet hook fairly well by the end of it. Yeah. And then I move on to this, which is slightly more challenging, but still fairly doable, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. So I think, if you were faced with the prospect of a blanket like this as a beginner, you'd look straight away at the centre of it and think, I can't do that. It's beyond my capabilities.
But it's not.
But actually, if you break it down into pieces, so this was first, this was second, third one was probably this one. So there's 4 of those again, and you'd make 4 central flowers.
Okay, so just the white bit and the pink.
Yeah, so the yellow and pink in the middle there and the white flowers, so you'd have 4 flowers, and then your next row is an area of chain and some treble crochet in there. So you're only sort of working on these more complicated flowers once you've really got to grips, and you've got also, by then you've got a template so this one needs to come out the same size as this one.
And is there many more techniques in this?
No, not really. The only thing, and it's something that I really love about crochet compared to knitting, is you can build up these areas of sort of 3D, which you can't really do. Well, you can do it with knitting, but not so easily. And so this is made, all of these are made from the centre out. So you start here with your little white flower and you add on these petals. And then later on, what you do is you work at the back. Can you see there at the back there? Yeah. You've got like a framework that you then build on layer by layer under there. So although that looks quite complicated, it really, once you've done these stitches down here, everything is in there. It's just... The other thing I've always done as well is I do step-by-step images all the way through. So for every little step of that flower, there is an image of what that should look like at that point.
That seems so doable.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm going to do one.
Yeah. And it amazed me, actually, because what happened with Lily Pond, the fact that it went out as a free pattern, and it's still available, you can go and download the patterns, is it went bonkers. It really did. There's people all over the world making these blankets. And, I had groups from South Africa and from Holland and all over sort of sending me pictures of their lily ponds. And it was really lovely that so many people said I was a beginner. And I'm so pleased that I actually managed something like this. So,
that's amazing. Great. Okay. Now let's have a quick look at this one. This one you've used really unusual colours. I can see black there.
Yeah. So this one is... this is the second one I did for Starcraft as a free crochet along. So this was so popular, the Lily Pond, that we decided we'd do it again. And this one was based on is Mexican in kind of design. I based it on the idea of Frida Kahlo's dresses. It's got quite a Mexican feel to it. And it was really unusual. And actually, from my art background, at art school, we weren't allowed to use black. We were never allowed to touch black paint. So to use black in a design for me was a really big thing. No. Yeah, it was a big no-no.
Taboo.
Yes, and actually the number of emails I got from people saying, it's black, I can't see it. But I really felt that for this design it needed the black to really sort of push the colour.
Frida Kahlo, definitely.
Yeah, so again on this one, it started easy with this one. That one's a little bit harder, and then each piece got progressively harder until you worked in your final hexagon at the middle here, which was, again, that's that whole 3D thing, just working behind the stitches.
It's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah.
All this layering, And this is in cotton, I can feel, isn't it?
This is a DK weight cotton. Again, good clear colour.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. And the one that over here is more muted and looks very, very technical.
Yeah, so this is me going back to my kind of Rowan roots, if you like, because having done the crochet club with Rowan originally, I really wanted to go back to that, to really create, you said at the beginning about heirloom pieces. I wanted a piece that, you're not going to throw in the machine and that you are going to really treasure. And I love Rowan's range of yarns. I love the subtlety of their colour palettes and things. So what I wanted to do was create a design, and this sort of talking about the design process that you asked me about, I wanted to design something based on the Bloomsbury set. And I don't know whether you've been, there's a house down in near Lewis, called Charleston Farmhouse, which is where Vanessa Bell and Duncan Grant, who were members of the Bloomsbury group, they're both artists, and they moved down there in the early part of the last century. And as artists, they worked down there, but also they painted every conceivable surface in that house.
Really?
So you walk in there's a painted fireplace, there's painted tables, there's all sorts of painted surfaces. So I used elements of those paintings down at Charleston to create this blanket. They also did murals at the local church as well. So if you ever get a chance to go, it really is beautiful. So there's elements of the design that came from the murals at the church as well. So they're very sort of muted, washed out paintings. They did lots of sort of like painting on and then wiping away colour. So you get these kind of
see-through
depths of colour. So I felt the Rowan range really kind of...
It does that.
Yeah.
All of these shades
almost looks
down
sort of
here.
painted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one, what I did with this one is I wanted it to do it as a crochet along again. We did it as a kit. So being Rowan, it has again quite a high price point for the yarn, but we also did it as a book. So I've done the patterns in the book in the order of making. So again, you don't start with this really complicated one. You start, actually, people hate me for it, you start with the striped edging. That's the first thing you do. So again, it's sort of a learning process. This one has beads in it as well.
I can see beautiful beads all over the place.
Yeah. So beading with crochet actually is lovely and easy. You thread the beads onto the yarn first, and then simply at the point where you want to bead, before you do the stitch, you bring the bead up to the top of the yarn and complete the stitch, and the bead just gets caught into the stitch. So people think it's a really complicated technique, they're worried about it, but actually it's easy. It's really easy. Yeah, I mean, there's a few different ways of putting beads in. Here there's...
that's gorgeous, these little black beads here.
Yeah, that's put in on a treble crochet.
Okay, yeah.
So that's put in on again, you just, on the last step of the stitch, you just pull the bead in as you're working on the reverse side. And then this one is actually these, it amazes me how the colour looks different with beads. I love that those almost look green.
They do, don't they?
And those look grey.
Yeah.
But they're the same beads. And that's done with a half treble, but in the same way, you just pop them in. But again, you can see that, it's that whole layering thing that I love to do.
It's completely stunning, and I love this sort of lacy work around it here.
Yeah, Yeah, so
this open work.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with crochet is it's heavy because it uses so much yarn. So I wanted to, I mean, obviously I'm thinking about the price point of the kit as well, but also I wanted these elements, these flowers, to really sort of be the focal point of those pieces. And my little butterfly on there.
Yeah, it's stunning.
Yeah.
It's totally stunning. You know, I'm quite ambitious. Could I start with this one?
As long as you did it in the right order.
Because I love this one.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of the things, is that people who are doing the crochet alongs, desperate to get on with the more complicated bits.
I'd be happy to start on this bit.
Start with the border and, hopefully you'd get there. Again, there's all the technique downloads there, all on the website.
And I noticed that you've also got some lining.
Yes, this one, because we hang them at shows.
Yeah.
So with a lot of my blankets, what I tend to do is put them in like a clip frame almost, so they're clipped in to put up on the wall. But this one goes on a pole, so that's why that backing's there.
Yeah.
But also it helps keep the shape.
It does.
A lot of people like to hang them, so yeah.
So what are the main technical challenges or problem areas that crocheters have? Because you've done a lot of workshops. What's the most common advice that you're giving out? And perhaps also, because I'm sure in the viewers there's quite a few very good crocheters, do you have any advice or tips for them?
I think the main thing with crocheters is tension. Yeah. And it's the dreaded thing, isn't it? I know when I used to do knitting workshops as well, it's like you go around and say, how many of you check your tension? How many of you check your gauge? And it goes very quiet because people know they haven't done it even though they should. Crocheters are far more likely to get a difference in tension. So I think it's because there's so many more steps to a stitch.
Okay.
You know, whereas with knitting, you're taking it off of a needle, aren't you? Yarn round, off the needle, and that's just one sort of step, if you like. With crochet, far more steps in which to create a different tension. So my thing is check your tension. Counting, that's the other thing about crochet, is it's that constant counting as you're doing your row, and at the end of rows or rounds, making sure before you start your next row that you have got the foundations right for your progressive for your next rows. And I think that's the one thing that most crocheters don't do enough of. That's my one little tip, is to constantly count, because what you could do is just blindly keep crocheting and each time you're losing one stitch per row.
It's like the beginner knitter who ends up with very odd.
Yeah, absolutely. And the difference with crochet as well compared to knitting is that if you make a mistake, so say you've done a little purl stitch where you should have done a knit stitch when you're knitting, if you're good, you can drop that stitch down, can't you, and use a crochet hook or whatever to put it right. With crochet, it's done. That doesn't happen. It doesn't go down. Yeah. So if you make a mistake down here and you're now up here, because you've been watching the telly or, you're kind of going for it big time, if you've made that mistake, you have to go back. And I would always say to go back and put it right, because if you don't go back, you look at your blanket at the end or you look at your project and go, oh, if only I'd gone back and put that right. So it's kind of, I think my biggest tips are checking, counting, and tension. Ripping. And ripping and tension, yes. In terms of techniques, crochet, there are basically 2 or 3 stitches. And once you've got those stitches, that's what all of this is made from, is the same stitches. There is more and more textural work coming out now, which is really exciting. More kind of crochet cables going on, and you can achieve those by doing back post stitches, which is, instead of going into the chain at the top, you actually work around the post of the stitch. And that can create a textural element. So that's quite exciting that that's starting to happen, and I think that's something that I'm going to have to brush up on my techniques for. And
incorporate in your next blanket.
Probably, a bit more texture. I love bobbles.
Yeah,
I really love doing bobbles, but it's very definitely trendy for more sort of textural work. So, yeah.
Well, it's been so exciting to be able to sit with such a great crocheter and designer and really see what what you can offer, you know, what's available, what you can do with crochet. That's been a real treat.
Good.
So it's been super fun to have you on Fruity Knitting. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
And I'm really excited. I'm going to get a kit, and I'm going to make this my way of learning to crochet, because I think I can see that it really is a step-by-step thing, and you can start on the really easy bits. And like you said, you've left the best bits to last.
Yeah, to tempt you through.
Exactly. So it's like just eating your veggies before you get to the good stuff.
Definitely.
And you've got the dessert at the end.
Yeah. That's great.
That's cool. Okay, well, look, thanks again so much.
You're welcome.
We'll say goodbye to the audience. Bye.
Bye.